20 years. That is the maximum sentence for wire fraud. A fact Blaire ignored when she threw me into the Chicago snow. She sees a weak caregiver. Forgetting I spent years hunting financial predators on Wall Street, she thinks she secured the fortune, unaware I copied her private server the night our father died, and that shivering beggar I just pulled from the mud. He is not homeless. He is about to become her worst nightmare. My name is Jordan Loxley, and the only thing I felt as the first shovel of dirt hit the mahogany casket was the biting cold of a Chicago winter seeping through the soles of my shoes. The funeral had been a sparse affair. My father had friends, hundreds of them, or so he thought when he was the vibrant, deal-making titan of industry. But sick men do not make deals, and dead men do not sign checks. So, the crowd had thinned out long before the hearse arrived at the cemetery. It was just me, the priest, and the wind that whipped off Lake Michigan, carrying with it the promise of a snowstorm that the weatherman said would bury the city by nightfall. I stood there long after the groundskeepers had finished their work, staring at the fresh mound of earth that looked violently dark against the pristine white snow. I was wearing a thin black wool coat that had been stylish 5 years ago but now just felt insufficient. I had not bought new clothes in 3 years. My wardrobe, like my career and my bank account, had been frozen in time the day my father's diagnosis came down like a guillotine. The crunch of snow behind me broke the silence. It was a deliberate, heavy sound, not the respectful tread of a mourner. I did not turn around. I knew that perfume. It was a custom blend of jasmine and arrogance that cost more per ounce than my entire monthly grocery budget. "You are going to freeze to death out here, Jordan," a voice said. It was not a concern. It was an observation, delivered with the same emotional detachment one might use when commenting on a traffic jam. I turned slowly. Blaire stood there, looking less like a grieving daughter and more like she was posing for the cover of a fashion magazine's morning issue. She wore a fur coat that probably cost $20,000, black leather gloves, and oversized sunglasses that hid her eyes. She was not looking at the grave. She was looking at her phone. "He is gone." "Blaire," I said, my voice raspy from days of silence. "You could at least look at where he is resting." Blaire sighed, a sharp exhale that created a plume of white steam. She tapped her screen one last time, slipped the phone into her designer bag, and finally looked at me, or rather, she looked through me. "He was gone a long time ago. Jordan," she said. "The man in that box ceased to be my father the moment he started drooling on himself and forgetting my name. I grieved him then. This is just logistics." She reached into her bag. I expected a tissue. I expected, perhaps foolishly, a card. Instead, she pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope sealed with the wax emblem of the family trust. She extended it toward me. "What is this?" I asked, not taking it. "Take it," she commanded. "It is time-sensitive." I pulled my hand from my pocket, my fingers red and stiff, and took the envelope. I tore the seal. Inside was a single sheet of heavy legal bond paper. The header read, "Notice to vacate." I read the first line, then I read it again. "You have 24 hours to vacate the premises located at 400 North Lakeshore Drive. Penthouse B." I looked up at her. The snow was falling harder now, catching in her meticulously styled blonde hair. "You are evicting me. Today we just buried him, Blaire." "Technically, the estate is evicting you," Blaire said, examining her manicure. "I am just the executor delivering the news. And honestly, Jordan, you should be grateful I'm giving you 24 hours. The lawyers wanted you out immediately. They see you as a liability." "A liability." I laughed. A dry, cracking sound. "I have lived in that house for 3 years. Blaire, I was the one who managed the oxygen tanks. I was the one who learned how to administer the morphine drips so he would not scream in pain at 3 a.m. I was the one who cleaned him. Where were you?" Blaire's face hardened. The mask of boredom slipped, revealing the sharp, jagged edges of her resentment. "I was working. Jordan, I was building a company. I was out there in the real world. securing a legacy for this family, while you were playing nursemaid and hiding from your own failures. Failures. I stepped closer to her. I was a senior risk assessment auditor for Iron Vault. I was tracking millions of dollars in fraudulent assets before you even knew how to open a spreadsheet. I quit my job because you refused to pay for a full-time nurse. And look where that got you, she sneered, gesturing at my coat, my worn boots, the dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. You look like a ghost. Jordan, you have been mooching off Dad for 3 years, living rent-free in a multi-million-dollar penthouse, eating his food, using his utilities. You think changing a few bedpans entitles you to squat there forever? I was not squatting, I said, my voice trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so hot I thought it might melt the snow around my boots. I was his daughter. I was keeping him alive. Well, he is dead now, Blaire said brutally. Job done, position terminated, and frankly, I have buyers coming to view the property on Monday. I cannot have you moping around in the guest wing, smelling like antiseptic and sadness. It brings down the property value. She checked her diamond-encrusted watch. Actually, I changed my mind. 24 hours is too generous. The staging crew is coming at 6 in the evening. That gives you exactly 2 hours to get your junk out of my house. 2 hours? I choked out. I cannot pack 3 years of life in 2 hours. Then leave it. She shrugged. I am hiring a junk removal service for the rest anyway. Anything left behind goes to the dump. She turned to walk away, her heels crunching on the frozen path. I watched her go, a figure of absolute selfishness wrapped in fur. But as she walked, a memory spiked in my brain. It was a memory from 2 nights ago. The last time my father had been lucid, he had grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for a dying man. His eyes, usually cloudy with medication, had been clear and frantic. The study, Jordan. He had whispered, his voice like dry leaves, the blue leather folder, inside the hollow back of the dictionary, the old dictionary on the bottom shelf. You need to get it. It has the truth. It has everything. He had drifted into a coma an hour later and never woke up. In the chaos of the coroner arriving and the funeral preparations, I had not had a single second to go into the study. I had forgotten. Until now. Blaire, I called out. She stopped but did not turn around. What? The study, I said, walking toward her. I need to get some personal things from the study. Dad said he left something for me there. Blaire turned then, and a slow, cruel smile spread across her red lips. It was the smile of a predator who had already eaten the prey and was now just picking its teeth. The study, she asked innocently. Oh, you mean that hoarding pit he called an office? My stomach dropped. What did you do? I had a cleaning crew in there yesterday morning while you were at the funeral home, meeting with the director, she said. God, it was filthy. Dust everywhere. Old papers stacked to the ceiling. It was a fire hazard. Where are the papers, Blaire? I felt a cold sweat break out on my back. Where are the books? Gone, she said lightly. I told them to clear everything. The shelves, the desk, the drawers, all of it. You threw them away. Better, she said. We burned them. Well, most of it. There was so much trash, old receipts, useless contracts from the 90s, stacks of handwritten gibberish. That gibberish was his life, I whispered. Then a thought hit me, a horror deeper than the rest. What about the box on the desk, the wooden box with the letters? Blaire rolled her eyes. Oh, God, the love letters, the ones he wrote to your mother 30 years ago. Yes, I said. He read them every night. He wanted to be buried with them. Well, that is too bad, Blaire said, adjusting her scarf. Because they are ash now. I threw them into the fireplace myself. It was actually quite poetic. Watching that sappy, sentimental drivel turn into smoke, it cleared the air. Literally. I stood frozen. The wind howled around us. But the only sound I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. She had burned them. She had burned the letters he wrote to my mother. She had not just stolen the money. She had not just kicked me out. She had erased him. She had erased the only evidence that he had ever loved anyone other than her mother. It was a cruelty so precise, so unnecessary, that it snapped something inside me. For the last 3 years, I had been soft. I had been patient. I had been the good daughter, the caregiver, the one who absorbed the pain and the insults because I thought it was my duty. I looked at Blaire, standing there with her smug smile, thinking she had won. She saw a broken woman. She saw a pushover who was about to go quietly into the night. She did not see the auditor. She did not see the woman who had once brought down a CEO of a Fortune 500 company for hiding assets in the Cayman Islands. She did not see the woman who could trace a digital footprint through 3 continents and a dozen shell companies. I took a deep breath. The cold air filled my lungs, sharp and invigorating. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but around it, a layer of ice was forming, a protective, hard shell. 2 hours, I said. My voice was steady. It did not tremble. It did not crack. Blaire looked slightly disappointed. She had wanted tears. She had wanted a scene. Yes, 2 hours. Do not make me call security. You won't have to, I said. I will be gone before the staging crew arrives. Good, she said. And Jordan, don't try to take anything valuable. We have an inventory list. I only want what is mine, I said. Blaire laughed, a harsh sound that startled a crow from a nearby branch. Nothing is yours. Jordan, even the coat on your back was bought with my father's money. She turned and walked toward her waiting limousine. The driver held the door open for her, and she slid inside without looking back. I stood there for a moment longer, watching the black car disappear through the cemetery gates. I looked down at my left wrist. I was wearing an old smartwatch, a bulky model from 4 years ago with a cracked screen. It looked like junk, but Blaire did not know that I had modified the firmware. I tapped the screen 3 times. A small red dot pulsed silently in the corner. Recording saved. I had caught the entire conversation, the eviction, the timeline, but more importantly, her admission of destroying the personal property of the estate before probate had even cleared. Burning the letters was moral bankruptcy. Destroying estate documents was a legal gray area, but it was a start. I looked back at my father's grave one last time. I am sorry about the letters. Dad, I whispered to the dirt, but I promise you, I am going to find out what was in that blue folder. She thinks she burned the truth, but she forgets who I am. I turned my back on the grave and began the long walk to the train station. I had 2 hours, 2 hours to pack my life, 2 hours to say goodbye to the home I had turned into a hospice. But I also had 2 hours alone in the penthouse with the high-speed internal network that Blaire used for her business. She thought she was sending me away empty-handed. She thought the power lay in the deed to the house and the balance in the bank account. She was a relic of an old world, thinking physical assets were the only things that mattered. I walked faster, my heels digging into the snow with new purpose. The sadness was receding, replaced by a familiar, cold focus. It was the mindset I used to enter when I started an audit. The feeling of the hunt. Blaire had given me a deadline. She had no idea she had just given me a window of opportunity. I checked my watch again. 1 hour and 45 minutes left. It was more than enough time to download a ghost image of her hard drive. The service elevator rumbled as it climbed the 40 stories to the penthouse. A stark contrast to the silent, velvet-lined ride of the main lift that Blaire used. I leaned my head against the cold metal wall, closing my eyes for a brief second. My body ached with a bone-deep fatigue that had nothing to do with the physical exertion of the funeral and everything to do with the crushing weight of the last 3 years. But as the doors slid open into the utility hallway, I straightened my spine. I was not Jordan the grieving daughter anymore. I was Jordan the auditor. And I had work to do. I walked past the kitchen, where the caterers were already setting up for the post-funeral reception that I had not been invited to. and slipped into the narrow corridor behind the pantry. This was where my room was. It was technically a maid's quarters, a glorified storage closet that barely fit a twin bed and a narrow dresser. When I moved in 3 years ago, Blaire had claimed the guest suites were being renovated. The renovation never happened, but I never complained. Being close to the kitchen meant I could hear the kettle whistle when my father needed tea, and the thin walls allowed me to hear his coughs in the night. I pulled my suitcase from under the bed. It was a sturdy, nondescript black carry-on that I used to live out of when I was flying from New York to London to Tokyo on a weekly basis. I opened it and started packing. I did not have much: a few changes of clothes, my toiletries, a framed photo of my mother, and my laptop. I paused when my hand touched the cold aluminum of my laptop. It was a high-end machine, custom-built with encryption capabilities that were illegal for civilians in 3 countries. It was a relic from my past life, a life Blaire knew nothing about. To my stepsister, I was just a failed accountant who had washed out of the corporate world. She thought I spent my 20s drifting. She had no idea that drifting was a cover for my work with Iron Vault, a private forensic accounting firm that specialized in what we politely called aggressive asset recovery. I was not just an accountant, I was a hunter. My targets were CEOs who built mansions with pension funds and warlords who hid blood money in shell companies. They called me the Bloodhound at the firm because once I caught a scent of a discrepancy, I never stopped until I found the source. I had walked away from a 6-figure salary and a partnership track the day the doctor told us my father needed 24-hour care. Blaire had been in Paris for Fashion Week. When I called her, begging for help with the medical bills, she laughed. She said Dad had insurance. She did not understand that insurance does not cover the kind of specialized, round-the-clock monitoring he needed. She said she would not put a dime into a sinking ship, so I liquidated my savings, sold my stocks, and became the nurse she refused to hire. I traded my tailored suits for scrubs and my spreadsheets for medication charts, but the auditor in me never died. It just went dormant. I tossed a stack of books into the trash bin in the corner of the room, needing to make space in my bag, as the heavy hardcover thudded against the bottom. It hit something metallic, a hollow clatter. I frowned. I had emptied that bin 2 days ago. I reached in and pulled aside the books. Lying face down among the crumpled tissues was a tablet. It was rose gold, the back engraved with Blaire's initials in cursive script. I turned it over. The screen was shattered, a spiderweb of cracks radiating from the home button, and the frame was bent as if it had been thrown against a wall in a fit of rage. I recognized this device. It was the iPad Blaire used for everything. She was glued to it constantly, managing her social media, her emails, and her so-called business empire. Why was it in my trash? Then I remembered the crash I heard last night, the sound of Blaire screaming at someone on the phone, followed by a smash. She must have come in here to vent her frustration where the servants wouldn't see, destroyed the device, and dumped it in the maid's bin, assuming the help would take it out. She assumed it was garbage. I sat down on the edge of my narrow bed and plugged the broken tablet into my laptop. The screen of the iPad remained black, dead to the world. But my laptop chimed. A device had been detected. My fingers flew across the keyboard, moving with a muscle memory that felt like coming home. I bypassed the standard interface and launched a diagnostic tool I had written myself 5 years ago. The hardware was damaged. The display interface was severed, but the solid-state drive was intact. A prompt appeared on my laptop screen: enter passcode to decrypt data. I almost laughed. Blaire was a creature of habit, and her defining trait was narcissism. She would not use a random string of numbers. She would not use a complex algorithm. I typed in 0812, August 12th, her birthday, access denied. I paused. Okay, maybe she was smarter than I thought. I tried her mother's birthday, access denied. I leaned back, thinking, what did Blaire love more than herself? Nothing. But she loved money. Specifically, she loved the day she launched her brand. Lumina, which she claimed was a revolutionary fashion line, but was actually just rebranding cheap imports. That was 2 years ago, October 1st. I typed 1001, access granted. The progress bar filled with satisfying speed. Folders began to populate on my screen. Photos, contacts, messages, banking apps. I ignored the photos. I went straight for the financial data. I opened her email archive first. It was a mess of promotional newsletters and frantic exchanges with suppliers, but I filtered for keywords: transfer, wire, bank, trust. One email chain caught my eye. It was from a private banker at a boutique firm in the Cayman Islands. The subject line was simply Project Cleanup. I opened the attachment. It was a spreadsheet. As I scanned the rows and columns, the cold knot in my stomach turned into a block of ice. For the last 2 years, Blaire had been the acting director of the Loxley Hope Foundation, a charity my father started to provide scholarships for underprivileged youth in Chicago. He had been so proud of it. He thought Blaire was expanding its reach. The spreadsheet told a different story. There were outgoing transfers labeled as consulting fees to a company called Lumina Ventures, LLC. $5,000 here, $10,000 there. It started small, testing the waters. Then, as my father's health declined and he stopped reviewing the monthly statements, the amounts grew. $20,000 for event planning, $50,000 for brand strategy. In total, she had siphoned over $400,000 from the charity. She was stealing from orphans to fund her failing fashion line. My hands shook, not from fear, but from adrenaline. This was it. This was the smoking gun. But as I scrolled down, I realized this was just the petty cash. This was just her allowance. I switched to the banking app data. I pulled the logs from the family trust account. This was the main vein, the account that held the bulk of the estate's liquid assets and, more importantly, my father's pension portfolio. My father had worked for 40 years to build that portfolio. It was meant to be the legacy that kept the family secure for generations. I saw a notification for a scheduled transaction. It had been set up yesterday, mere hours after my father's heart stopped beating. Transaction type: full liquidation and wire transfer. Source: Loxley. Family Trust. Portfolio A. Destination: Nebula Holdings. Seychelles. Amount: $5,200,000. Status: pending approval. Execution date: tomorrow. 1200 hours. I stared at the number. $5 million. She was draining the entire account. She was not just evicting me. She was taking everything. Nebula Holdings was undoubtedly a shell company, a black hole where money went to disappear. Once that money crossed international lines into the Seychelles, it would be gone forever. The jurisdiction there was a nightmare for recovery agents. Even Iron Vault would struggle to get it back. My cursor hovered over the Cancel Transaction button. I could stop it right now. I could freeze the account, trigger a fraud alert, and lock Blaire out. It would save the money. It would save the legacy. But then I hesitated. If I stopped it now, what would happen? Blaire would claim it was a mistake. She would say she was moving the money to a better investment vehicle. She would lawyer up with Marcus, the family attorney who was clearly in her pocket. She would spin this as a misunderstanding. It would be a civil dispute, a messy probate battle that could drag on for years while she remained free, living in the penthouse, spending what was left. Attempted fraud is hard to prove. It requires proving intent. But wire fraud. Actual, completed wire fraud across international borders. That is a federal crime. That is a felony with a mandatory minimum sentence. I looked at the clock on my laptop. It was 4 p.m. The transfer was set for noon tomorrow. That coincided exactly with the reading of the will and the final settlement meeting at the lawyer's office. A plan began to form in my mind. It was dangerous. It required nerves of steel. I had to let her think she had succeeded. I had to let her push that button. I had to let the money leave the account. I needed to catch her red-handed. Not just planning the crime, but committing it. I needed the FinCEN portal. I opened a new browser window and navigated to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network website. I still had my credentials from my Iron Vault days. They were technically inactive, but the backdoor access I had built for emergency filing was still operational. I began to draft a suspicious activity report, or SAR. I filled in every detail: the source account, the destination account in the Seychelles, the IP address of the device that set up the transfer, Blaire's iPad. I did not submit it. Not yet. If I submitted it now, the bank might freeze the funds before the meeting. I needed the freeze to happen during the meeting. At the exact moment she tried to confirm the transfer, I needed the FBI to see the transaction hit the wire and then slam the gate shut. I saved the draft. Then, I went back to the iPad data. I needed more. I needed leverage to ensure that when the hammer dropped, it dropped on everyone involved. I scanned her text messages with Marcus, the lawyer. Message from Marcus. The old man is gone. Did you get the signature on the revised addendum? Message from Blaire. I forged it last week while he was sedated. He didn't know what day it was. We are clear. Message from Marcus. Good. Bring the paperwork to the office on Tuesday. And bring the other thing. The guy I hired to appraise the jewelry says the vintage Cartier is worth 6 figures. I felt a wave of nausea. They had been planning this while my father was dying. While I was spoon-feeding him broth, they were practicing his signature. I exported the text thread. I exported the banking logs. I packaged it all into a single, encrypted file and uploaded it to a secure cloud server that only I could access. Then, I wiped the iPad. I initiated a factory reset. When the screen finally lit up with the "Hello, welcome" message, it was as clean as the day it was bought. I tossed it back into the trash bin. Let her think it was just broken junk. Let her think I was just a homeless girl packing her rags. I closed my laptop and slid it into my backpack. The room felt different now. It was no longer a prison or a place of mourning. It was a staging ground. I stood up and looked at myself in the small, cracked mirror on the back of the door. My eyes were red. My skin was pale, and my hair was pulled back in a messy bun. I looked like a victim. Perfect, I whispered. I would play the part. I would walk out of here looking defeated. I would let her gloat. I would let her think she had stripped me of everything. Because the more arrogant she was, the less likely she would be to check the security protocols on the trust account. I grabbed my suitcase and the backpack. I took one last look at the room. I would not miss the cramped space, but I would miss the proximity to the memories of my father. I am going to get it back, Dad, I said softly. Every single cent, and I am going to make sure the world knows exactly who Blaire Loxley really is. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. I could hear Blaire's voice coming from the living room. She was on the phone again. Her voice loud and brash. Yes, I want the staging done in white and gold. Make it look expensive. I want to list it for $10 million by Friday. I am cashing out and moving to the Riviera. I walked past the living room archway. She saw me and paused her conversation, covering the phone with her hand. Leaving already, she called out, smirking. Don't forget to leave the keys on the counter. And Jordan, try not to sleep on a park bench. It looks bad for the family name. I stopped. I turned to her. I forced my face to crumble, forced my shoulders to slump. I don't know where to go. Blaire, I said, injecting a wobble into my voice. Can't I just stay until the weekend? Out? She pointed to the door. Now. Fine, I whispered. Goodbye, Blaire. I walked to the elevator. My head bowed, but inside, my heart was racing with a cold. Rhythmic beat. I had the evidence. I had the plan. All I needed now was to survive the night and find a way to make sure the authorities were watching when she walked into that meeting tomorrow. I stepped out of the building and into the biting wind. The snow was knee-deep now. I had no idea where I was going to sleep, but that didn't matter. The cold didn't bother me anymore. I had a fire burning inside me that would burn down Blaire's entire world. The heavy steel doors of the freight elevator did not just open. They parted like the jaws of a beast, revealing a crew of 6 men in coveralls that were stained with the dust of 1,000 other dismantled lives. They did not ask for permission to enter. They did not introduce themselves. They surged past me into the foyer of the penthouse with a mechanical efficiency that made my stomach turn. These were not movers who carefully wrapped china in bubble wrap. These were clear-out specialists. The kind of men you hired when you wanted a property stripped to the bare walls in under 3 hours. I stood frozen near the entryway, my hands still gripping the handle of my suitcase. I watched as the foreman, a man with a clipboard and eyes devoid of any empathy, pointed a thick finger at the antique coat rack that had stood by the door since I was a child. "Trash," he barked. 2 men grabbed the mahogany stand, snapping one of its carved legs as they wrestled it toward a large canvas bin on wheels. The sound of the wood splintering echoed through the high-ceilinged hall like a gunshot. "Stop!" I lunged forward, dropping my bag. "You cannot just break things. That is an antique from the 19th century." The foreman did not even look at me. He looked past me, toward the living room where Blaire was standing. "Owner says everything goes. Said it is all dated junk." I ran past him, my heart hammering against my ribs. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Blaire was not just staging the house for sale. She was purging it. She was erasing the physical footprint of my father's existence to make room for her beige. Minimalist fantasy. I sprinted into the living room and skid to a halt. The space, once warm and filled with the eclectic mix of history and art my father loved, was being systematically assaulted. A worker was sweeping the contents of the curio cabinet into a heavy-duty black trash bag. I heard the sickening crunch of porcelain shattering against porcelain. That was my grandmother's Limoges collection, gone in seconds. Another man was pulling the oil paintings off the walls, stacking them face to face without any protective layering, scratching the canvas. "Blaire," I screamed. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the frozen expanse of Lake Michigan. She held a crystal wine glass in one hand, one of the few things she had seemingly decided to keep filled with a dark red vintage that I recognized from my father's private cellar. She took a slow sip, watching a worker rip the silk curtains off the rods. "You are still here?" she asked, turning to me with a look of mild irritation. "I thought you would be halfway to the homeless shelter by now." "You are destroying everything," I gasped, breathless with horror. "You are destroying his life." "I am decluttering," she corrected, swirling the wine. "The realtor said the haunted Victorian look does not sell in this market. People want clean lines. They want potential, not the dusty memories of a dead man." I scanned the room frantically. The furniture was being dragged away. The shelves were being cleared. But my eyes sought only one thing: the violin. It was a Guarneri copy from the early 1800s. It wasn't worth millions like a real Guarneri, but it was the single most precious object in the world to my father. He had played it every Sunday evening for 30 years. Even when his hands started to shake from the illness, he would take it out of its velvet-lined case just to polish the wood and tighten the bow. He had promised it to me. He had taught me to play on that instrument, his large hands guiding my small fingers over the strings. I looked at the corner where the display stand usually sat. It was empty. The stand was overturned on the rug. "Where is it?" I demanded, stepping toward her. "Where is the violin?" Blaire took another sip of wine, her eyes drifting over the rim of the glass to the chaos around us. The what? Oh, that squeaky old fiddle." "It is not a fiddle," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It is an instrument. It was Dad's favorite possession." "Where is it, Blaire?" She shrugged, a gesture of pure indifference that made me want to scream. "It was ugly. Jordan, the varnish was peeling. It looked like something you would find in a pawn shop. It did not fit the aesthetic." "Did you sell it?" I asked, praying that her greed had outweighed her cruelty. If she sold it, I could buy it back. I would use every cent I had. "Sell it," she laughed. "Who would buy that? No. I told the guys to get rid of it, but they said the case was moldy, so I told them not to put it in the truck with the donation piles. I didn't want the spores spreading." "Where is it?" I repeated, screaming this time. She sighed and pointed a manicured finger toward the sliding glass door that led to the terrace. "I put it out there to air out before they haul it to the dump. Or maybe I just wanted it out of my sight. It was depressing. I spun around and looked through the glass. The world outside was a white blur of driving snow and wind. The temperature had dropped to 10 degrees below zero, and there, lying on the stone pavers of the balcony, was the violin. It was not in its case. She had thrown the instrument itself out into the Chicago winter. "No," I whispered. I scrambled for the handle of the sliding door. It was frozen shut. I threw my shoulder against it, ignoring the pain, and shoved. The ice cracked, and the door slid open with a grinding protest. The wind hit me instantly, a physical wall of freezing air that sucked the breath from my lungs. The snow swirled around me, blinding and sharp. I stumbled out onto the terrace, my boots slipping on the layer of ice that had formed over the stone. I fell to my knees beside it. The violin lay in a drift of snow like a murder victim. The rich, honey-colored wood, which had been kept at a constant humidity and temperature for decades, was now exposed to the brutal thermal shock of the sub-zero storm. I reached out with trembling hands to touch it. The damage was catastrophic. The sudden freeze had caused the wood to contract violently. A long, jagged crack ran down the center of the body, splitting the spruce top from the bridge to the tailpiece. The neck had warped, twisting away from the body, and two of the strings had snapped, coiling into the air like dead vines. The varnish, once smooth and glowing, was frosted over with ice crystals. I picked it up. It felt light, hollow, and incredibly cold. It creaked in my hands, a sound of death. "Dad," I sobbed, clutching the broken instrument to my chest. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry." I tried to shield it with my body, curling around it as if my body heat could reverse the physics of what had happened, but I knew it was too late. The soul of the instrument was gone. The voice that had filled this house with Bach and Vivaldi was silenced forever. I heard a tapping on the glass. I looked up through my tears. Blaire was standing on the other side of the door, safe in the warmth of the penthouse. She was smiling. She raised her wine glass in a mock toast and mouthed a single word. "Trash." Something inside me stopped moving. The sobbing in my chest ceased abruptly. The tears freezing on my cheeks did not renew. I looked at the woman behind the glass, my sister, my tormentor, the thief who had stolen my inheritance and now destroyed the only tangible piece of my father's love left to me. She expected me to break. She expected me to come back inside begging, screaming, or attacking her in a futile rage that would get me arrested. She wanted a reaction. She wanted to see the messy, emotional wreck of a daughter who had lost everything. But as I knelt there in the snow, clutching the corpse of the violin, the heat of my anger vanished. It was replaced by something else, something harder. It felt like the process of calcification, layer upon layer of cold, hard sediment settling over my heart, sealing it off, turning the soft tissue into stone. I was no longer sad. I was no longer desperate. I was simply finished. I stood up. I took off my coat, the thin wool providing no protection against the wind, and wrapped the broken violin in it. I swaddled it carefully, treating it with the reverence of a holy relic. I ignored the biting cold on my arms. I ignored the snow soaking into my blouse. I walked back into the living room. The change in my demeanor must have been palpable because Blaire's smile faltered slightly. She took a step back as I entered, the wind swirling in behind me before I slid the door shut. "You are insane," she muttered, looking at the bundle in my arms. "You are going to get hypothermia over a piece of firewood." I did not look at her. I walked past her, past the movers who were currently dismantling the dining table, and past the spot where my father's favorite chair used to be. "Hey," Blaire called out, her voice shrill. "I told you to leave the keys." I stopped at the entryway. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy brass key ring. I did not turn around. I simply dropped them on the floor. They hit the marble with a dull clatter. "Goodbye, Blaire," I said. My voice was low, flat, and completely steady. It did not sound like my voice. It sounded like the voice of a judge reading a verdict. "Make sure you close the door on your way out," she yelled after me, regaining her composure. "And don't come back begging when you realize that wood is worthless." I picked up my suitcase and my backpack. With the violin wrapped in my coat and tucked securely under one arm, I walked out of the penthouse. I did not take the service elevator this time. I took the main lift. I stared at my reflection in the polished brass doors as I descended. My hair was wet with melted snow. My blouse was soaked. My lips were blue, but my eyes were dry. I looked down at the bundle in my arms. The violin was broken. Yes, but the wood still held the memory of the music, and I still held the memory of the man. Blaire had made a fatal calculation error. She thought that by destroying his things, she could hurt me. She didn't realize that by destroying his things, she had liberated me. I had nothing left to lose, and a person with nothing to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth. I tightened my grip on the violin. I would find a luthier. I would find someone who could stitch the wood back together, no matter the cost. I would make this violin sing again, and when it did, the song it played would be a dirge for Blaire's empire. The elevator chimed as it reached the lobby. I stepped out, ignoring the curious looks of the doorman who saw a shivering woman in a wet blouse carrying a coat-wrapped bundle. "Miss Locksley," he asked, concern etching his face. "Do you need a taxi? It is a blizzard out there." "No, thank you. Henry," I said, "I have a walk to make." I needed the cold. I needed the walk to the train station to solidify the plan in my head. I needed every step to remind me of why I was doing this. Blaire had called the violin clutter. She had called my father's life clutter. Tomorrow, at the meeting, I would show her exactly what happens when you try to sweep away the wrong kind of dust. You don't get a clean room, you get a dust explosion. I pushed open the heavy lobby doors and stepped into the whiteout of the city. I was walking into the storm, but for the first time in 3 years. I wasn't afraid of the cold. I was the cold. The motel room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and lemon disinfectant, a scent that was a far cry from the lavender-infused air of the penthouse. But it had the two things I needed most: a deadlock on the door and a fiber-optic internet connection. I had chosen it specifically for its proximity to the financial district, just a 20-minute walk, which saved me cab fare I could no longer afford. I set the broken violin on the only chair in the room, unwrapping it gently from my wet coat. I placed it near the radiator, not too close, just enough to let the ambient warmth seep into the traumatized wood. "Rest now," I whispered to it. "We have work to do." I sat on the floor, my back against the bed, and opened my laptop. The screen was the only source of light in the dim room, casting a blue glow over my hands as they flew across the keyboard. The transformation had begun. Jordan the daughter was gone. Jordan the auditor was online. For the next 6 hours, I did not move, I did not eat, and I did not sleep. I was building a weapon. The document on my screen was titled, "Suspicious Activity Report Case File. Locksley, 492. It was 50 pages of pure, unadulterated evidence. I had structured it with the precision of a surgeon. Section 1. The embezzlement from the charity. I attached the spreadsheets, the fake invoices, and the cross-referenced bank statements showing the flow of funds into Blaire's personal accounts. Section 2. The wire fraud conspiracy. I uploaded the text messages between Blaire and Marcus, highlighting the timestamps that proved premeditation. Section 3. The imminent threat. This was the kill shot. The pending transfer of $5.2 million to the Seychelles. I reviewed every comma, every decimal point. In the world of federal prosecution, a single typo could be the difference between a conviction and a dismissal. It had to be perfect. When I finished, the clock on the taskbar read 3 a.m. My eyes burned, but my mind was razor sharp. I hovered the cursor over the Submit button on the FinCEN portal. I could send it now. I could blow the whistle and let the agents raid the penthouse at dawn. But that was risky. Raids take time to organize. Warrants need signatures. By the time they kicked down the door, Blaire might have already moved the money. No, I needed to catch them in the act. I needed the transfer to be initiated while the authorities were watching in real time. I saved the report as a draft, set to high-priority trigger status. I would launch it from my phone the moment I walked into that meeting, but I needed more than just digital evidence. Digital evidence could be challenged. They could claim hacking. They could claim the files were doctored. I needed a human element. I needed to force a mistake in the room. I opened a new tab and pulled up the dossier on the law firm, Vortex Legal. It was a slick, high-powered firm that specialized in wealth preservation, which was a polite way of saying they helped rich people hide their money from taxes and ex-wives. I clicked on the profile of Marcus Vane, the senior partner handling our estate. His photo showed a man in his 40s with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and a suit that cost more than a mid-size sedan. I dug deeper, accessing public court records and bar association filings. Marcus had a reputation. He was known as the Teflon attorney. Nothing stuck to him. He had been investigated 3 times for facilitating questionable offshore transfers, and each time, the investigation had been dropped due to lack of evidence or clerical errors. He was good. He knew where the lines were, and he knew how to dance right on the edge of them without falling over. But everyone makes a mistake eventually. I went back to the Loxley family trust deed. I had read it 100 times over the years, but I read it again, searching for a loophole, a weakness, anything, and then I found it. Article 7, Section 4, Paragraph B, for any liquidation of assets exceeding $2 million. The transaction must be countersigned by the appointed independent monitor. The independent monitor. My father had added this clause 20 years ago. Back when he first set up the trust, he wanted an external check and balance, someone outside the family and outside the bank who would ensure the money wasn't squandered. I searched for the name of the monitor. It was listed as A. Sterling. I frowned. I had never met anyone named Sterling. In all the years I managed my father's affairs. This person had never shown up. No emails, no phone calls. The monitor position seemed to be a ghost role, a formality that had been forgotten. I searched the name A. Sterling in the legal databases. Nothing relevant came up. A few retired judges, a few deceased lawyers, but no one connected to my father or Vortex Legal. It was a dead end. Or was it? If the monitor was missing or inactive, how were Blaire and Marcus planning to push the transfer through? The bank's compliance algorithm would flag a $5 million transfer without that signature. It was a hard stop in the system. I went back to the text logs I had stolen from Blaire's iPad. I searched for Sterling. There it was. A message from Marcus to Blaire 3 days ago. Marcus. Don't worry about the monitor clause. Sterling has been off the grid for a decade. He is basically a myth at this point. I have drafted a waiver stating he is incapacitated. I will sign as his proxy. The bank won't look twice. Blaire. Is that legal? Marcus. It is if nobody challenges it. And who is going to challenge it? Your sister. She doesn't even know the clause exists. I leaned back, a cold smile touching my lips. They were going to forge the proxy. They were going to impersonate a missing person to bypass the security check. That was it. That was the trap. If I could prove in the room that the proxy was invalid, or better yet, if I could demand to see this A. Sterling, their entire house of cards would collapse. But I couldn't just demand it. I needed leverage. I looked at the suit hanging on the back of the bathroom door. It was a navy blue Armani power suit, tailored to within an inch of its life. I had bought it 5 years ago after my biggest win at Iron Vault. It had been sealed in a garment bag at the bottom of my suitcase, the only piece of my past I had refused to donate. I stood up and walked over to it. I unzipped the bag. The fabric was pristine. It smelled of cedar and success. I stripped off the damp, wrinkled clothes I had been wearing since the funeral. I showered, scrubbing the smell of the motel and the memory of the snow from my skin. I dried my hair and pulled it back into a tight, severe chignon. I put on the suit. It fit like armor. The sharp lines of the shoulders made me stand taller. The structured waist made me feel solid, grounded. I stepped into my heels, 3-inch black stilettos that clicked against the linoleum floor with the sound of a pistol cocking. I looked in the mirror. The grieving, exhausted caregiver was gone. Staring back at me was a shark. My eyes were clear, cold, and predatory. You wanted a fight, Blaire, I said to my reflection. You are going to get a war. I checked the time. 7 in the morning. The meeting was at 9. I had the evidence. I had the legal strategy. But I still felt a nagging gap. I was walking into a room with 2 wolves, and I was one lamb. Even a lamb with a bomb strapped to its chest is still a lamb. I needed something else. I needed a witness, not just a camera, but a person, someone neutral, someone whose presence would force Marcus to behave, even for a second, but who I had no friends left in the city. My professional network had dried up years ago. I was alone. I packed my laptop into my leather briefcase. I took the thumb drive containing the encrypted evidence and taped it to the inside of my wrist, hidden by the sleeve of my jacket, just in case they tried to take my bag. I walked out of the motel room, leaving the broken violin on the chair. I will be back for you. I promised it. The city was waking up, groaning under the weight of the snowstorm. The streets were slush and gray ice. I began the walk to the financial district. My heels were not made for this weather, but I didn't care. I marched with a rhythm that cut through the cold. I was heading into the lion's den. I was walking into Vortex Legal to face my sister and her crooked lawyer. I knew the odds were against me. I knew they held all the cards, the money, the property, the legal standing. But they didn't know I had read their hand, and they didn't know I had an ace up my sleeve, even if I didn't quite know how to play it yet. As I turned the corner toward the towering glass spire of the Vortex building, I saw the construction site ahead, and I saw something else, a figure, struggling in the mud. I didn't know it then, but my witness wasn't on a contact list or in a database. He was waiting for me in the snow. The financial district of Chicago is a canyon of steel and glass, designed to funnel the wind until it feels like a physical assault. At 8:30 in the morning, the storm was no longer just snowing, it was screaming. The skyscrapers disappeared into a low, gray ceiling of clouds, and the sidewalks were a treacherous obstacle course of slush and black ice. I tightened my grip on my briefcase, lowering my head against the gale as I navigated the crowded pavement. Everyone around me was moving with the same desperate urgency. Men in trench coats and women in heavy parkas rushed toward the revolving doors of their office buildings, eyes fixed on the ground or their phones. Completely insulated by noise-canceling headphones and the armor of their own importance, to them, the storm was an inconvenience, a delay in their morning commute. Nothing more. I was 30 minutes early for the meeting at Vortex Legal. I needed that buffer. I needed time to stand in the lobby, thaw my hands, and mentally rehearse the takedown one last time. Every step closer to the building felt like tightening a spring inside my chest. As I turned the corner onto LaSalle Street, the crowd suddenly parted and flowed around an obstruction on the sidewalk like water around a rock. No one stopped. No one looked down. They just sidestepped, their faces blank masks of indifference. I followed the flow, annoyed at the bottleneck, until I saw what they were avoiding. It wasn't a construction barrier. It wasn't a pile of snow. It was a man. He was sitting in an old, rusted wheelchair that looked like it had been salvaged from a scrap heap. One of the wheels was stuck deep in a patch of half-frozen mud where the sidewalk had crumbled near a construction site. He was trying to rock the chair free, his arms straining, but he was too weak, and the mud was too thick. As I got closer, I saw a paper coffee cup lying on its side in the slush a few feet away. A scattering of quarters and dimes glinted dully against the gray ice. He must have dropped it while trying to free his wheel. He was leaning precariously over the armrest, his trembling fingers inches away from a quarter, trying to retrieve the meager earnings of his morning. "Watch it, old man." A young stockbroker in a beige coat snapped as he clipped the back of the wheelchair with his briefcase. He didn't even break stride. He just kept walking, checking his watch, leaving the man to teeter on the edge of tipping over. The man didn't shout back. He just slumped slightly, his hand falling back to his lap. He wore a coat that was more holes than fabric, a patchwork of gray wool that was soaked through at the shoulders. His hair was long and matted, white as the snow falling on it, and his beard hid most of his face. But I could see his hands. They were purple with cold, the skin cracked and bleeding around the knuckles. I stopped. The stream of commuters bumped into me. grumbling as they were forced to navigate around yet another obstacle. "Move it, lady," someone growled behind me. I ignored them. I stared at the man. In that moment, the noise of the city faded. I didn't see a beggar. I didn't see clutter. I saw my father's violin lying on the terrace, freezing, broken, and discarded because it didn't fit someone's aesthetic. I saw the indifference of a world that valued speed and efficiency over human dignity. This man was being erased, just like my father's letters, just like my home. He was right there, visible to everyone, yet completely unseen. I checked my watch. 8:40. I was losing my buffer. If I stopped, I would arrive at the meeting with wet shoes and frozen hands. I would look less polished. I would lose the psychological edge of a perfect appearance. But then I looked at his hands again. They were shaking so hard, he couldn't even grip the armrest. "Damn the meeting," I whispered. I stepped out of the flow of traffic. I walked straight into the mud, my 3-inch heels sinking into the freezing sludge. The cold seeped through the leather instantly, biting at my toes, but I didn't care. "Don't move," I said, my voice cutting through the wind. "Let me get that." The man looked up. His eyes were startlingly clear, a piercing blue that seemed out of place in a face ravaged by exposure. He looked surprised. Not that someone had stopped, but that someone had spoken to him. I dropped my briefcase on a dry patch of concrete and crouched down. I reached into the slush, ignoring the stinging freeze that shot up my fingers, and started picking up the coins. 1 quarter, 2 dimes, a penny frozen into the ice. I dug it out with my fingernail. I gathered them all, wiping the sludge off on a clean tissue from my pocket, and placed them back into the paper cup. "Here," I said, handing it to him. He took it, his fingers brushing against mine. His skin was like ice. "Thank you," he rasped. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. "You are going to ruin those gloves, miss." "Gloves are replaceable," I said. I stood up and moved behind the wheelchair. "Hold on, I am going to get you out of this hole." I grabbed the rubber handles. They were slick with snow. I planted my feet, feeling the mud suction around my heels, and pushed. 1, 2, 3. I shoved with everything I had. The chair groaned, the metal frame creaking in protest. The mud refused to let go. I gritted my teeth, digging my heels in deeper, ruining the polish on my shoes, splattering gray slime onto the hem of my pristine Armani trousers. "Come on," I grunted, with a sucking sound. The wheel popped free. The chair lurched forward onto the solid pavement. I caught it before it rolled too far. Steadying him, I walked around to the front. He was shivering violently now, his teeth chattering. The effort of trying to help me push had drained the last of his energy. I looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't just cold. He was freezing to death. I reached up and undid the knot of my scarf. It was a vintage cashmere wrap, charcoal gray, incredibly soft and warm. It had cost $400 5 years ago. I looped it around his neck, tucking the ends into his ragged coat. "Keep this tight," I said. He touched the fabric, his eyes widening. "This is too much. You can't." "I can," I said. "And you need it more than I do." I looked around. There was a coffee cart on the corner, battling the wind with a flapping umbrella. "Wait here," I commanded. I ran to the cart. Large black coffee, extra hot, and a bagel, toasted. I paid with the last $20 bill in my wallet. I ran back, the steam from the cup curling into the snow. I pressed the warm cup into his hands. "Drink," I said, slowly. He took a sip, closing his eyes as the heat hit his system. A flush of color returned to his cheeks. He took a bite of the bagel, eating with a hunger that was painful to watch. I picked up my briefcase and tried to wipe the worst of the mud from my shoes with a napkin. It was hopeless. My perfect, intimidator look was ruined. I had mud on my ankles. My hair was windblown, and I was missing my scarf. "You are late," the man said suddenly. I looked up. He had stopped eating and was watching me with an intensity that made me pause. He wasn't looking at my muddy shoes. He was looking at my face. "What?" I asked. You kept checking your watch before you stopped, he said. You are heading to one of these towers. Someone dressed like you, walking with that kind of pace. You have a meeting, a big one. I do, I admitted, checking the time again. 8:50. I have 10 minutes. Then go, he said. You have done enough, more than enough. I can't just leave you here, I said. The storm is getting worse. I have survived worse than snow, he said, a strange, grim smile touching his lips beneath the beard. But you look like you are marching into a firing squad. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Something like that. I am going to see my sister. She is trying to steal my father's estate. The man's eyes narrowed. The blue became steel. Inheritance theft. It is a common sport in this city. Let me guess. She has a lawyer who wears a suit sharper than his ethics. I stared at him. Yes. How did you know? I used to know this world, he said vaguely, looking up at the skyscrapers. I used to know the sharks who swim in these waters. They smell blood, and they don't stop until there is nothing left but bone. He looked back at me. Which firm? Vortex Legal, I said. The lawyer's name is Marcus Vane. The reaction was instantaneous. The man's hands tightened around the coffee cup, crushing the cardboard slightly. His jaw set. The shivering stopped, replaced by a rigid tension. Marcus Vane, he repeated. The name sounded like a curse coming from his mouth. The man who smiles while he evicts widows and hides assets for cartels. You know him? I asked, surprised. I know of him, the man corrected, but his tone suggested otherwise. He represents everything that is wrong with the law. He thinks the rules are just suggestions for the poor. He looked at the Vortex building, looming above us like a dark monolith in the snow. Then he looked at me. He saw the mud on my shoes. He saw the defiance in my eyes. And he saw something else, perhaps a reflection of a fire he hadn't felt in a long time. You are going in there alone, he asked. I have no choice, I said. I have evidence. I have a plan. Evidence is good, he said. But in a room with Marcus Vane, evidence can disappear. He will bully you. He will lie. He will have security drag you out if you raise your voice. I can handle him, I said, though a flicker of doubt sparked in my chest. Can you? The man tilted his head. You are one woman against a firm that owns half the judges in this state. You need a witness. You need someone they can't intimidate. I don't have anyone, I said quietly. Everyone I know is either working for them or afraid of them. The man finished his coffee in one long swallow. He crumpled the cup and tossed it into a nearby bin with surprising accuracy. He wiped the crumbs from his beard. You have me, he said. I blinked. Excuse me. Take me with you, he said. I can't, I stammered. No offense. But look at you. They won't even let you in the lobby. And Blaire, my sister, she will destroy you. She hates. I stopped myself before saying clutter. She hates anything that isn't perfect. That is exactly why you should take me, he said. His voice was gaining strength, the raspy quality fading into a deep, authoritative timbre. Think about it. You want to throw them off balance. You want to rattle Marcus Vane, walk in there with a beggar. It will confuse them. It will disgust them. And while they are busy staring at the mud on my wheels, they won't be watching your hands. He wheeled himself closer. Besides, he added softly, I have a debt to pay. You gave me your scarf. You stopped when everyone else walked by. I may look like nothing to them, but I have eyes. I can witness what they say. And if they try to physically remove you, well, this chair is heavy, and I have nothing to lose. I looked at him. It was an insane idea. Walking into a multi-million-dollar settlement meeting with a homeless man I had met 10 minutes ago, it was professional suicide. It was absurd. But then I thought of Blaire's face. I thought of how she would recoil. I thought of the psychological chaos it would create. She was expecting a broken, solitary Jordan. She wasn't expecting a Jordan who brought the streets into her ivory tower, And there was something about this man, a dignity beneath the rags, a sharpness in those blue eyes that made me feel like he wasn't just offering to be a prop, he was offering to be an ally. I made a decision. It was reckless. It was impulsive. It was perfect. "Okay," I said. "What is your name?" "Louis," he lied smoothly. "Just Louis." "Okay. Louis," I said, grabbing the handles of his wheelchair. "Let's go make a scene." I pushed him toward the revolving doors of the Vortex building. The security guard stepped forward to block us, his hand raising in a stop gesture. "Delivery entrance is in the back," the guard sneered. Looking at Louis, I stepped out from behind the chair. I locked eyes with the guard, channeling every ounce of my former executive authority. "He is with me," I said, my voice ice cold. "I am Jordan Loxley. I have a 9 o'clock with Marcus Vane to sign a $5 million transfer. If you delay me by one more second, I will tell Mr. Vane that you are the reason his client walked out and took her fees to another firm. Do you want to be that guy?" The guard hesitated. He looked at my suit, ignoring the mud. He looked at the name on his list, and he looked at the fear of offending a partner's client. He stepped back. "Go ahead, ma'am." I pushed Louis into the warmth of the lobby. We left tracks of mud and slush across the polished marble floor. People stared. Whispers broke out. I didn't care. I pushed the elevator button. "Ready, Louis?" I asked as the doors opened. He looked at his reflection in the mirrored wall of the elevator, adjusting the cashmere scarf around his neck. "Ready as I'll ever be, kid," he said. "Let's go see Marcus." The elevator ascending to the 40th floor of the Vortex Legal Tower was a hermetically sealed chamber of polished brass and mirrored glass, moving with such smooth, silent velocity that the only sensation of movement was the popping of my ears. Inside this golden box, the contrast between my companion and our surroundings was violent. The air smelled of lemon oil and expensive climate control, a sterile scent that tried and failed to mask the odor of wet wool, old coffee, and the metallic tang of the street that clung to Louis. I watched the digital floor numbers tick upward. 10, 15, 20. "We are going to be late," I said, breaking the heavy silence, though my voice lacked any real urgency. "It is 9:05. Louis, who was adjusting the cashmere scarf I had given him to hide the worst of his frayed collar, looked up at me in the reflection of the elevator doors. His blue eyes were sharp, dissecting my reflection as if reading a legal brief. "You do not sound like a woman who is worried about being tardy," he observed, his voice raspy but steady. "Usually, people heading to this floor are checking their watches every 3 seconds and sweating through their shirts." I let out a short, dry laugh that scraped against my throat. "That is because they are going to closing deals or signing mergers. They have something to gain." I leaned back against the handrail, closing my eyes for a brief second. "I am not going to a meeting. Louis, I'm going to an execution. My own." "An execution?" he asked. "This meeting is just a formality," I said, opening my eyes and staring at the reflection of my muddy shoes. "It is just a theater performance where I sit there and witness my sister steal what is left of my father's life. She has the lawyers, the fake documents, and the bank codes. I am just the audience. So, if the audience arrives 5 minutes late to the robbery, it does not really change the ending, does it?" Louis shifted in his wheelchair, wincing slightly as his leg moved. He turned his head to look at me directly, ignoring the mirror. The intensity of his gaze made me straighten my spine instinctively. "You are not like the others," he said softly. "The others, the people who work in this zip code," he said, gesturing with a trembling hand toward the world outside the elevator shaft. "I have sat on that corner for 8 months. I watch them. They walk with their heads down and their phones up. They see the sidewalk as a spreadsheet. They calculate the distance between point A and point B, and anything in the middle a pothole, a pigeon, a person is just an inefficiency to be routed around. They see stock prices. They see margins. They do not see humans. He paused, his eyes softening. You saw me. You didn't just calculate the cost of your dry cleaning. You stopped. I looked down at my hands. The mud was drying under my fingernails, dark crescents of grime against my pale skin. I used to be like them, I admitted, my voice dropping to a whisper. I worked at Iron Vault. I spent my 20s looking at numbers, chasing assets, turning people's lives into audit reports. I was good at it. I was ruthless. What changed? Louis asked. My father got sick, I said. The memory of the last 3 years washed over me, the smell of medicine, the sound of the oxygen machine, the quiet nights reading to him while he slept. When he was dying, he told me something I had forgotten. He said that at the end of the day, your net worth is not what is in the bank. It is how you sleep at night. He taught me that dignity is the only currency that does not depreciate. I looked up at Louis, my eyes burning. I realized that too late. I let my sister treat me like a servant because I thought keeping the peace was the same as keeping my dignity. But yesterday she threw his violin into the snow. She broke it. I took a shaky breath. That was when I realized that dignity isn't passive. Sometimes you have to fight for it. The elevator chimed. 35th floor. We were getting close. Who is the lawyer? Louis asked suddenly. His voice had lost its softness. It was hard, demanding. I told you downstairs, I said. It is Vortex Legal. I know the firm, he said, waving his hand dismissively. I mean the specific partner. A shark tank like this has many predators. Who is the one handling the estate? Marcus Vane, I said. The reaction was visceral. Louis's hands, which had been resting loosely on his lap, gripped the armrests of the wheelchair so hard that his knuckles turned white. His entire body stiffened, and for a moment, the frailty of his age seemed to evaporate, replaced by a rigid, cold anger. Marcus, he muttered. The name sounded like a curse word on his tongue. I should have known. Of course, it is Marcus. You know him? I asked, stepping closer to the chair. Louis stared at the elevator doors as if he could see through the metal to the man waiting 5 floors above us. Marcus Vane is a vulture, he said, his voice low and vibrating with contempt. No, that is an insult to vultures. Vultures serve a purpose in the ecosystem. Marcus is a parasite. He thinks he is the king of this tower because he knows how to bury the truth under a mountain of paperwork. He specializes in breaking people who cannot afford to fight back. Louis looked up at me, and there was a fire in his eyes that frightened me. He is the reason I am. He stopped himself, shaking his head. He is a bad man. Jordan, a dangerous man. I know, I said. That is why I have the FinCEN report. That is why I have the evidence. Paperwork, Louis scoffed. Marcus eats paperwork for breakfast. He will shred your evidence before you even pull it out of your briefcase. He will intimidate you. He will use legal jargon to make you feel small, stupid, and powerless. That is his game. The elevator pinged. 40th floor. The doors began to slide open, revealing the expansive, light-filled reception area of Vortex Legal. I have to try, I said, gripping the handles of his wheelchair. I am going to leave you in the reception area. Louis, it is warm there. There is coffee. I will come get you when I'm done. No, Louis said. I paused, the wheelchair halfway out of the elevator. What? I am coming with you, he said firmly. Into the room. Louis, you can't, I whispered, glancing nervously at the receptionist who was already staring at us with wide, horrified eyes. This is a confidential settlement meeting. They will throw you out. Blaire will... She will say terrible things to you. Let her, Louis said. He reached back and patted my hand, which was gripping his chair. His skin was rough, but his touch was reassuringly solid. I need a warm place to sit, don't I? And you need a witness, not a piece of paper, but a pair of eyes. Marcus Vane is a coward. He thrives in the dark. He hates being watched. He will call security, I argued. Though a part of me, a desperate part, wanted him there. Let him try, Louis said. A strange, grim smile played on his lips. I may be an old cripple in a borrowed scarf, but I know things about Marcus that he has forgotten I know. If he tries to remove me, I will cause a scene that will make your mud tracks look like a minor inconvenience. He turned his head to look at me, and in that moment, the connection between us snapped into place. It wasn't pity, it wasn't charity, it was a partnership. Two discarded people, two pieces of clutter, uniting against the people who had thrown them away. You are walking into a war zone. Kid, Louis said. Do not walk in alone. I looked at the receptionist, who was now picking up her phone, presumably to call security or warn Marcus. I looked at the long corridor of glass-walled offices that screamed wealth and exclusion, and then I looked at Louis. He was right. Blaire wanted to isolate me. She wanted me to feel small. Bringing Louis wasn't just an act of kindness. It was a tactical disruption. It was a statement. Okay, I said, my voice steadying. We go in together. Good, Louis nodded. Now, push. My legs are killing me. I pushed the wheelchair out of the elevator and onto the plush white carpet of the reception area. The silence of the room shattered instantly. The receptionist, a young woman with a headset and a look of absolute panic, stood up. Ma'am, she squeaked, rushing around her desk. You cannot bring that in here. This is a client area. I didn't stop. I kept pushing, gaining momentum. I am a client, I said, my voice projecting across the lobby with the authority I had honed in boardrooms years ago. My name is Jordan Loxley. I am here to see Marcus Vane, and this is my associate. Your associate. She stared at Louis, at the mud dripping from his wheels, at the matted beard. Yes, I said. Is there a problem? She stammered. Good, I said. Which room? Conference room B, she whispered, pointing down the hall, too stunned to physically block us. Thank you. I marched down the hallway, the wheelchair wheels leaving two long, dark streaks of gray sludge on the pristine white carpet. It looked like war paint. As we approached the heavy frosted glass doors of Conference Room B, I could hear laughter from inside. It was Blaire's laugh, high, tinkling, and utterly devoid of warmth. She was celebrating. She thought she had already won. I stopped at the door. I looked down at Louis. Ready? I asked. He reached up and adjusted the scarf one last time, sitting up as straight as his spine would allow. Kick the door down. Jordan, he said. I didn't kick it, but I didn't knock either. I grabbed the handle and shoved the door open with enough force that it banged against the stopper. Vibrating the glass walls, the laughter inside cut off instantly. We were in, and the look on their faces was going to be worth every ounce of mud on my shoes. The silence that descended upon the conference room was heavier than the heavy oak door I had just slammed shut. For a moment, the only sound was the howling of the blizzard battering against the floor-to-ceiling glass walls and the soft, rhythmic squeaking of the wet rubber wheels on Louis's chair as I pushed him further into the room. The scene before us was a tableau of premature victory. Blaire was perched on the edge of the mahogany conference table, her legs crossed, holding a crystal flute of amber liquid. Marcus Vane was standing by the window, his silhouette cut sharply against the whiteout of the storm. Holding a matching glass, a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon sat in a silver bucket of ice in the center of the table, sweating beads of condensation that matched the diamonds around Blaire's neck. They looked like royalty. We looked like the revolution that had come to drag them to the guillotine. Blaire's smile, which had been bright and triumphant a second ago, curdled instantly. She lowered her glass, her nose wrinkling as the scent of wet wool, stale coffee, and unwashed humanity wafted from Louis and filled the climate-controlled air. It clashed violently with the smell of her expensive gardenia perfume and the leather of the chairs. What? Blaire said, her voice flat and cold. Is that... She did not say, who. She said, what? Hello, Blaire, I said, my voice calm. contrasting with the wild appearance of my hair and the mud on my ankles. "You wanted a meeting. Here I am." "I asked for you," Blaire snapped, sliding off the table and taking a step back as if we were contagious. "I did not ask you to bring the contents of a dumpster with you. Are you insane? Jordan, is this some kind of sick joke?" Marcus turned from the window. His face was a mask of polished indifference, but his eyes narrowed as they swept over Louis. He didn't look at Louis's face. He looked at his clothes, his shoes, the mud on the carpet. He was assessing liability and damage to the flooring. "You are tracking filth onto a Persian rug that cost more than your father's car," Marcus said smoothly. He reached for the sleek black intercom phone on the table. "I am calling security. This is a private law firm, not a soup kitchen." "Don't," I said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. Marcus paused, his hand hovering over the receiver. He looked at me, surprised by the steel in my tone. "This man is my associate," I lied, gripping the handles of the wheelchair. "He is my witness, and he stays." Blaire laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "Associate Jordan, look at him. He is a beggar. Did you pick him up off the street just to embarrass me? Is this your idea of revenge, making me smell this creature?" She waved a hand in front of her face, exaggerating her disgust. Louis sat perfectly still, his head bowed slightly, his hands folded in his lap under the cashmere scarf. He did not react to her insults. He was like a statue carved from patience and ice. "He stays," I repeated. "Or I go." I took a step back toward the door, pulling the wheelchair with me. "And if I go, Marcus, you know exactly what happens. The bank compliance officer is waiting for the waiver of contest. Without my signature on that document stating that I have no claim to the estate, the transfer of the liquid assets gets flagged for a standard 30-day probate review. You don't have 30 days. Blaire needs that money in the Seychelles by noon, or her creditors for that failing fashion line come knocking." It was a gamble. I was betting that they were desperate for speed. I was betting that their greed was stronger than their snobbery. Marcus froze. His eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. It was 9:15. He looked at Blaire, then back at me. He did the math. A 30-day delay would expose the cracks in their scheme. They needed this done today. They needed it done now. "Fine," Marcus hissed, pulling his hand away from the phone. "But I am not having a vagrant sitting at my conference table." He pointed a manicured finger to the far corner of the room, near a large potted fern. "Put him there, facing the wall. I don't want to see him. I don't want to smell him. If he makes a sound, deal's off, and I will have you both arrested for trespassing." "Deal," I said. I wheeled Louis to the corner, as I turned the chair so he faced the beige wallpaper. I squeezed his shoulder gently. It was a silent signal. "Listen, remember everything." Louis gave a barely perceptible nod. I walked back to the table and sat down in one of the leather chairs. It was soft, swallowing me up, but I sat on the edge, keeping my posture rigid. Blaire walked over to her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. She tossed them across the polished wood. They slid towards me, stopping just inches from my hands. "Let's get this over with," she said, taking a sip of champagne. "I have a flight to catch at 1. "Of course," I said. "The Riviera." "None of your business," she snapped. "Here is the deal. Jordan, because I am generous, and because Dad would have wanted me to take pity on you despite your incompetence, I am offering you a settlement." She reached into her purse and pulled out a check. She flicked it onto the documents. $5,000, she announced. I looked at the check. It was written on the estate account. $5,000. It wouldn't even cover the legal fees if I tried to fight them. It was an insult. It was a crumb thrown to a starving dog. 5,000, I repeated slowly. The estate is valued at $12 million. Blaire, the liquid cash in the trust alone is over $5 million. The estate, Blaire said, examining her nails, is riddled with debt. Dad made bad investments. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. Honestly, after I pay off the liabilities, I will be lucky to break even. I am doing you a favor by taking this burden off your hands." "Liar," I said. The word hung in the air. Marcus stepped forward, placing his hands on the table and leaning in. It was an intimidation tactic, meant to loom over me. "Be careful. Ms. Loxley, we have the ledgers. We have the audits. The estate is insolvent. If you don't sign this waiver and take the $5,000, you get nothing, zero, and we will sue you for the back rent you owe for the last 3 years." I looked up at him. I let my lower lip tremble. I let my shoulders slump. I needed them to think I was breaking. I needed them to think I was the scared little sister who didn't understand finance. I just want to understand," I whispered, my voice wavering. "Where did the money go? Dad was so careful. He had a pension portfolio. He had the bonds." "Market volatility," Marcus said dismissively. "Bad luck." I reached for the pen. My hand hovered over the signature line of the waiver. "If I sign this," I asked, looking at Blaire, "you promise you will take care of everything, the debts, the house?" "Yes, yes." Blaire waved her hand impatiently. "Just sign the damn paper. Jordan, stop stalling." "I need to know one thing first," I said, pulling my hand back slightly. The trust has a rule. Dad told me once. He said if anyone ever tried to move the big money, there had to be a special signature, a monitor." The room went dead silent. Marcus straightened up slowly. He exchanged a quick, sharp glance with Blaire. This was it. This was the trap. I had mentioned the one thing they thought I didn't know about. "You mean Mr. Sterling?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. "Yes," I said innocently. "Mr. Sterling, Dad said he was the only one who could approve a transfer. Did he sign off on this? Is he here?" Blaire laughed again, but this time it was nervous, brittle. She walked over to the table and slammed her champagne glass down. "Oh, grow up. Jordan," she sneered. "Mr. Sterling is a ghost. He hasn't been seen in 10 years. He's probably dead in a nursing home somewhere." "So, how can you move the money?" I asked, widening my eyes. "Won't the bank stop it?" "The bank does what we tell them to do," Blaire boasted, unable to help herself. She wanted to prove how powerful she was. She wanted to rub my nose in her cleverness. "Marcus handled it. We fixed the problem." "Fixed it," I pressed. "How?" "It is a legal workaround," Marcus interjected quickly, trying to shut her up. "A proxy assignment." "No, tell her," Blaire said, turning to Marcus with a smirk. "Tell her how smart we are. She thinks she is so righteous with her little rules. Let her know that rules are for poor people. Jordan." She leaned over the table, her face close to mine. I could smell the alcohol on her breath. "Mr. Sterling didn't need to sign anything," Blaire hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Because as of yesterday, Marcus is Mr. Sterling. We filed a power of attorney. We declared the old man mentally incompetent and absent. Marcus signed for him." I felt a jolt of electricity run through me. She had said it. She had admitted to the fraudulent filing. "But," I stammered, playing the confused fool one last time, Isn't that forgery, if Mr. Sterling isn't here?" "It is only forgery if you get caught," Blaire whispered, winking. "And who is going to catch us, you with your homeless friend over there?" She laughed. A cruel, ugly sound. "The money is already pending. Jordan, it is sitting in the queue. The moment you sign this waiver," Marcus hits enter, and $5.2 million flies out of Chicago and lands in the Seychelles, in an account called Nebula Holdings. And do you know who owns Nebula Holdings? She pointed to her own chest. "Me, not the estate. Not the creditors. Me, untraceable, untouchable." I looked down at the paper. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they could hear it. She had given me everything: the shell company name, the location, the admission of the fake signature. "You are stealing it," I said softly. "You are stealing the charity money, too." "The charity was a waste," Blaire scoffed. Giving money to losers so they can pretend to go to college. Please, I am putting that capital to better use. I am building an empire. By stealing from orphans, I said. Call it what you want, Blaire shrugged. I call it aggressive restructuring. Now sign, or get out and watch me spend it anyway while you rot in court for the next 5 years. She tapped her fingernail on the signature line. Click, click, click. Sign it, Jordan. Be a good little sister one last time. I looked at the pen. I looked at the check for $5,000. Then I looked at the corner of the room where Louis was sitting. He hadn't moved. He hadn't made a sound, but I knew he had heard every word. I picked up the pen. Marcus exhaled, a long sigh of relief. He thought he had won. He walked back to his laptop, which was open on the credenza. Good choice. Jordan, I am queuing the transfer confirmation now. As soon as that ink is dry, we are done here. I brought the pen to the paper. I wrote my name, but I didn't write Jordan Loxley. I wrote, in big bold letters, fraud. Then I stood up. What are you doing? Blaire asked, looking at the paper. Her eyes widened. What is this? I am not signing your waiver, Blaire, I said. My voice changed. The wobble was gone. The fear was gone. The auditor was back. And I am not taking your $5,000. Then you get nothing, she screamed. Marcus, call security. Get her out of here. You can call security, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out my phone. But I think you should check your email first. My email? Marcus frowned, his hand freezing on the mouse. I just hit send, I said, holding up my phone. To the FBI Financial Crimes Division, and to the bank's internal fraud unit. You are bluffing, Marcus sneered. You don't have anything. I have the logs from Blaire's iPad, I said calmly. I have the chat history where you discussed forging Sterling's signature. I have the IP addresses, and I have the recording of this conversation. I tapped my watch. Blaire's face went white, a sickly, ghostly white that made her makeup look like a mask. You recorded this, she whispered. Every word, I said, including the part where you admitted to being the beneficial owner of Nebula Holdings. That is a confession. Blaire. You little bitch. Blaire lunged across the table, her hands clawing for my phone. I stepped back easily. She stumbled, knocking over the champagne bucket. Ice water and crystals spilled everywhere, soaking the documents. It is over, Blaire, I said. The bank has already received the suspicious activity report. That transfer you are trying to make, it is going to hit a brick wall. No, Marcus said, his voice rising in panic. He started typing furiously on his laptop. No, I can override it. I just need to force the authorization. You can't, I said. Not without the monitor. I am the monitor, Marcus shouted, losing his composure completely. I have the proxy. The proxy is fake, I shouted back. And you know it. Who cares if it is fake? Marcus roared, slamming his fist on the desk. Sterling is dead. He is a ghost. No one is going to walk through that door and challenge me. The room fell silent again. The only sound was Marcus's heavy breathing and the dripping of the melted ice water onto the carpet. And then, from the corner of the room, a sound emerged. It was the sound of a throat clearing, a dry, raspy, authoritative sound. Actually, a voice said. We all turned. Louis was turning his wheelchair around. He moved slowly, deliberately. He ignored the wall he had been forced to face. He wheeled himself into the center of the room, the mud on his wheels cutting a new path through the spilled champagne. I would not be so sure about that, Marcus, Louis said. Marcus stared at him. His eyes bugged out. He looked like he was seeing a hallucination. You, Marcus whispered. Shut up, old man. I told you to stay in the corner. And I listened, Louis said. I listened very closely. I heard you say you forged a signature. I heard you say you declared Arthur Sterling mentally incompetent. Louis reached up with a trembling hand and pulled the cashmere scarf away from his face. He sat up straighter. The slump of the beggar vanished, replaced by the rigid posture of a man who had spent 40 years sitting on a bench, looking down at people like Marcus. "Tell me, Marcus," Louis said, his voice deepening, resonating with a power that shook the glass walls. "Do I look incompetent to you?" Marcus turned the color of ash. He backed away until his legs hit the credenza. It can't be," Marcus stammered. You are supposed to be." "Gone," Louis finished the sentence. But I came back for the show." Blaire looked between them, confused and terrified. "Who is he?" she screamed. "Who is this bum?" I smiled. It was a cold, satisfied smile. "Blaire," I said softly, "I think it is time you were formally introduced." I pointed to the man in the wheelchair. "Meet the monitor." The air in the room didn't just shift, it shattered. The revelation that the man they had dismissed as human refuse was, in fact, the very authority they were trying to bypass hit them like a physical blow. But denial is a powerful drug. "Monitor!" Blaire screeched, her voice cracking. She pointed a shaking finger at Louis. This is your grand play." "Jordan, you hired a homeless actor to pretend to be Arthur Sterling. That is pathetic, even for you." Marcus, however, wasn't screaming. He was staring at Louis with the look of a man who had just seen a ghost. He knew the face, somewhere, deep in the archives of his memory from law school textbooks or old firm portraits. He recognized the bone structure beneath the grime, but panic made him irrational. "It is a trick," Marcus muttered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "It is an impersonator. Sterling is 80 years old. He is probably senile or dead. This is just a vagrant in a wheelchair." He turned on me, his eyes wild. "You think this scares me? Bringing in a prop, I am going to have you disbarred. Jordan, oh wait, you are not even a lawyer. I am going to have you buried." "You are not listening, Marcus," I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria. "The trap isn't the man in the chair. The trap is what you just did." I opened my laptop, which had been sitting dormant on the table. The screen flared to life. I spun it around so they could see the display. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It wasn't a document. It was a live dashboard from the FinCEN portal, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. The header flashed red. "Alert suspicious transaction intercepted." "What is that?" Blaire asked, stepping closer, her champagne-soaked shoes squelching on the carpet. "That," I said, pointing to the screen, "is the federal government watching you try to rob a corpse." You hacked the bank?" Marcus gasped. "No," I corrected. "I used the whistleblower portal. I filed a suspicious activity report at 4 this morning. But I set a trigger condition. I told them to watch for a specific IP address yours. Marcus attempting to authorize a transfer to Nebula Holdings without a valid countersignature. I tapped a key. The screen refreshed. Status frozen. Investigation pending. Asset seizure protocol initiated. You see, I continued, the moment you hit Q on that transfer 5 minutes ago, you didn't send money. You sent a signal. You confirmed every single detail in my report. You tried to move $5.2 million to a known shell company using a proxy signature that was flagged as fraudulent the second it entered the system. Blaire scrambled for her phone. Her fingers were trembling so violently she dropped it twice before managing to unlock it. She opened her banking app. "No," she whimpered. "No, no, no." "What does it say?" "Blaire?" I asked coldly. She looked up, her face draining of all color. "Account locked. Contact federal authorities." "You froze my money," she screamed, lunging across the table again. "That is my money. I need that for the balloon payment on the warehouse. If I don't pay by Friday, they will seize the inventory." "They are going to seize a lot more than inventory," I said. "RICO statutes are very broad when it comes to wire fraud conspiracies." Marcus slammed his laptop shut. The veneer of the slick corporate lawyer had cracked completely, revealing the desperate, cornered animal underneath. "You little bitch," he hissed. "You think you are smart. You think this sticks? I will claim entrapment. I will claim you manipulated the data. I will say you hacked my system and planted the transfer." "Good luck with that," I said. "I have the logs, I have the metadata, and I have you on tape admitting you forged the proxy." "The tape is inadmissible," Marcus roared. "Two-party consent state. I didn't consent to being recorded." "Actually," I said, smiling, "Illinois has an exception for recording evidence of a felony in progress and stealing $5 million. That is definitely a felony." Marcus looked around the room, his eyes darting from the door to the window to me. He realized he was losing the narrative. He needed to regain control. He needed to be the alpha in the room again. His gaze landed on Louis. The old man was still sitting in the center of the room, watching the chaos with those piercing blue eyes. To Marcus, Louis was the symbol of his humiliation. The fact that he had been terrified, even for a second, by a beggar, made him furious. "And you," Marcus snarled, turning on Louis. "You get out of my office, now." Louis didn't move. "I am waiting for the police, Marcus. I believe they will want a statement from the monitor." "You are not the monitor," Marcus shouted, his veins bulging in his neck. "You are a piece of trash, a prop. I am sick of looking at you." Marcus marched toward the wheelchair. He was a big man, 6'2", fueled by adrenaline and rage. He raised his foot, aiming a kick at the rusted wheel of Louis's chair. I said, "Get out." I started to move, to intercept him, but I was too far away. "Marcus, don't." But Marcus didn't care. He swung his leg, intending to tip the chair over, to spill the old man onto the floor like garbage. The kick never landed, in a blur of motion that defied his age and his appearance. Louis's hand shot out. He caught Marcus's ankle in midair. The sound of the impact was a dull thud. Flesh against bone. Marcus froze, balancing on one leg, his eyes widening in shock. He tried to pull his leg back. He couldn't. The frail old man's grip was like a steel vise. "Let go of me," Marcus yelped, losing his balance. Louis looked up at him. The facade of the weak, trembling beggar dropped completely. His shoulders squared, his chin lifted. "You have made a lot of mistakes today, Mr. Vane," Louis said. His voice was no longer raspy. It was deep, resonant, and terrifyingly calm. "But touching me, that was your last one," with a sudden violent twist of his wrist. Louis shoved Marcus's leg backward. Marcus flailed, his arms windmills of panic, and crashed hard onto the floor. He landed on his back with a groan that knocked the wind out of him. Blaire screamed, and then, the impossible happened. Louis placed his hands on the armrests of the wheelchair. He pushed down, slowly, deliberately. He rose, he stood up. He wasn't crippled. He was stiff. Yes, and clearly in pain. But he was standing. He unfolded to his full height, which was nearly as tall as Marcus. He kicked the wheelchair away. It rolled across the room and slammed into the wall. "My legs are not what they used to be," Louis said, brushing the crumbs from his tattered coat. "Arthritis is a cruel mistress, but they work well enough to stand witness to a crime." He reached up and peeled off the matted gray beard. It came away in one piece, revealing a jawline that was lined with age but unmistakable in its authority. He used the cashmere scarf I had given him to wipe the theatrical grease paint from his cheeks. Beneath the grime and the makeup was a face that had graced the covers of legal journals for 3 decades. Marcus, gasping for air on the floor, looked up. His eyes went wide, bulging out of his head. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. "Sterling," he wheezed. Judge Sterling." "The Honorable Arthur Sterling, retired," the man corrected. "Founder of this firm, author of the very trust deed you just tried to violate, and, as of this moment, your worst nightmare." Blaire looked between them, trembling. Who is he?" "He is the man who built this building," I whispered. realizing the truth myself. He is the legend. Arthur Sterling looked down at Marcus with a disgust that was absolute. I built this firm on the principles of justice and integrity. I spent 40 years making Vortex Legal a name that meant something, and I have spent the last 6 months watching you turn it into a laundry machine for criminals. I didn't know, Marcus stammered, scrambling backward on the floor like a crab. I thought you were dead. Arthur stepped closer, his heavy boots leaving muddy prints next to Marcus's expensive suit. I went undercover, Marcus. I wanted to see how my partners treated the people who couldn't pay them $300 an hour. I sat on that corner for 8 months. I saw you kick my cup. I saw you spit on the sidewalk near my feet. I saw exactly who you are when you think no one important is watching. He turned to me. His eyes softened, the blue twinkle returning. And I saw who you were. Jordan, he said. When you thought no one was watching. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. Not a burner, but a sleek, encrypted satellite phone. He pressed a single button. Send them up, he said into the device. Send who? Blaire asked, her voice a tiny squeak. The friends I made while I was off the grid. Arthur said. It turns out the FBI is very interested in what a former high court judge has to say about money laundering in his own firm. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open. This time, it wasn't a receptionist. It was 6 agents in FBI windbreakers, weapons drawn. Federal agents, the lead officer shouted. Nobody move. Blaire dropped to her knees, sobbing. Marcus just lay on the floor, staring up at the ceiling, knowing his life was over. I stood there, my hand resting on my laptop, and watched the house of cards collapse. It hadn't taken a wrecking ball, just a woman who refused to sign, and a man who refused to stay seated. Arthur walked over to me. He didn't look like a beggar anymore. He looked like a king in rags. Well played, Ms. Loxley, he said, extending a hand. I took it. It was warm. Thank you. Mr. Sterling, I said. Call me Arthur, he smiled. I think we have a lot of work to do to clean up this mess. But first, I believe you have a violin that needs fixing. I nodded, tears finally stinging my eyes, not tears of grief, but of relief. Yes, I said. I do. The conference room was suspended in a state of violent paralysis. Marcus Vane was balanced precariously on one leg. His expensive Italian loafer caught in a grip that should not have belonged to a man trembling with hypothermia. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the hard drive on the table and the frantic thudding of my own heart. The man we knew as Louis did not let go. He twisted his wrist slightly, a calculated, martial movement that forced Marcus to hop backward to maintain his balance, flailing his arms like a drowning man. Remove your filthy foot from my person, Marcus, the old man said. The voice was not the raspy, gravel-filled whisper of the beggar I had met on the street. It was not the voice of a man broken by the wind and the cold. It was a voice that boomed from the chest, deep, resonant, and dripping with an authority so absolute it felt like a gavel striking a podium. It was a voice that commanded courtrooms, a voice that had sent men to prison for less than what Marcus had just attempted. Marcus froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. He knew that voice. Every lawyer in Chicago knew that voice. It was the voice that had lectured at the Bar Association for 3 decades. The old man released the ankle with a shove that sent Marcus stumbling back against the credenza. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement that commanded the attention of everyone in the room, the man reached up to his face. He dug his fingernails into the seam of the matted, yellowing beard that covered his jaw, with a wet tearing sound. He peeled it away. It wasn't hair. It was theatrical prosthetics. He dropped the clump of synthetic fiber onto the polished mahogany table, right next to the spilled champagne. Next, he took the cashmere scarf I had given him, the gray wool stained with the mud of the street, and wiped his face. He scrubbed away the layers of grease paint that had simulated grime and frostbite. He wiped away the darkened shadows under his eyes. When he lowered the scarf, the beggar was gone. sitting in the wheelchair, with his back straight and his eyes blazing with a cold, blue fire, was a man whose face was etched into the history of the city's legal system. He had high patrician cheekbones and a mouth set in a line of grim determination. He looked older than the portraits in the lobby, his hair whiter. But there was no mistaking him. Marcus slid down the front of the credenza until he hit the floor. His legs had simply stopped working. He stared up, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water. "Judge," Marcus whispered, the words strangling him. "Judge Sterling, you retired. You disappeared." "I did not disappear, Marcus," the man said, his voice filling the room. "I was simply watching." "No," Marcus whimpered, shaking his head in denial. "No, this is impossible. You are in Europe. You are in a home. You are not him." "I am Arthur Sterling," the man announced. He didn't shout, but the words hit the glass walls with the force of a physical blow. "I am the founder of this firm. I am the man whose name is on the building you are standing in. And I am the independent monitor of the Locksley Family Trust, the very assets you and this woman are currently attempting to embezzle." Blaire looked between Marcus and Arthur, her confusion morphing into a different kind of terror. She didn't know the face, but she knew the name. She knew the power that came with it. "Sterling," she shrieked. "But Marcus said you were senile. He said you were a ghost." Arthur turned his gaze to my stepsister. It was a look of such profound disappointment and judgment that I almost felt sorry for her. "And Marcus told me that you were a grieving daughter." Arthur said, "He told the partners that he was helping a young woman manage a difficult estate transition. He did not tell us that he was helping a vulture pick the bones of a good man." He looked down at his clothes, the tattered coat, the stained trousers. Then he looked back at Marcus. "You want to know where I have been, Marcus?" Arthur asked. "I have been right outside, for 6 months. I wanted to know what had become of my firm. I wanted to know if the values I built this place on, integrity, justice, service, were still alive." Arthur gripped the arms of the wheelchair and pushed himself up. He winced slightly as he put weight on his legs, but he stood tall, towering over the cowering lawyer. "So I put on a costume," Arthur continued. "I sat in the mud. I held out a cup. Because you can tell a lot about a man by how he treats someone who can do absolutely nothing for him. I became the clutter you despise so much." He took a step toward Marcus. "I watched you, Marcus. I watched you walk past me every morning. I watched you kick my cup. I watched you sneer at the people cleaning your floors. I watched you negotiate deals on your phone that danced on the edge of legality. But today you crossed the line from unethical to criminal." Marcus tried to scramble backward, but he was trapped against the wall. I can explain, sir. It was a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect the client's interests." "Protect the client?" Arthur laughed. A sharp, barking sound. "You just admitted to forging my signature on a federal document. You declared me mentally incompetent so you could bypass a security protocol I wrote myself 20 years ago. That is not protection, Marcus. That is racketeering." He turned to Blaire. She was clutching her purse to her chest, her knuckles white. "And you," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You called me trash. You called me a vagrant. You told your sister to let me freeze in the lobby." I didn't know who you were," Blaire stammered, tears of panic streaming down her face. "If I had known, I would have—" "You would have what?" Arthur cut her off. "You would have been polite. You would have offered me a seat. That is exactly the point. Ms. Locksley, your kindness is a transaction. You only treat people with respect if you think they have power. But the moment you saw a man with mud on his shoes, you showed your true face." He gestured to the room, to the luxury, to the view of the city. "I own this building," Arthur said. "I own the land it sits on. I own the firm that represents you. And I just witnessed you abuse a woman who stopped to help a stranger when she had nothing left to give." I stood there, stunned into silence. I looked at Arthur, the man I had saved from the snow, the man I had given my scarf to, the man I had worried would be embarrassed by my sister. I hadn't saved a beggar. I had saved the one man in Chicago who had the power to save me. It wasn't luck. It was karma. It was the universe finally balancing the scales. You, I whispered, looking at him, you are the monitor. Arthur turned to me, and the hardness in his face melted away. He looked at me with the same warmth he had shown when I handed him the coffee in the storm. Your father was a good man. Jordan, Arthur said softly. We played chess together in the park years ago. Before he got sick, he worried about you. He worried about what would happen when he was gone. That is why he insisted on the monitor clause. He knew his other daughter lacked a certain moral compass. He placed a hand on my shoulder. You didn't know who I was. You didn't do it for a reward. You stopped because you are your father's daughter. And that, my dear, is why you are going to win. Arthur reached into the pocket of his tattered coat and pulled out a sleek silver smartphone. It looked alien against the rough wool. He pressed a single button on the screen. This is Sterling, he said into the phone. Execute the warrant. What warrant? Blaire gasped. Who are you calling? I am not calling anyone, Arthur said calmly, putting the phone back in his pocket. The call was already made. The Economic Crimes Task Force has been sitting in the lobby for the last 20 minutes, waiting for my signal. I wanted to give you every opportunity to do the right thing. Blaire, I wanted to see if you would hesitate before you stole $5 million. But you didn't. You hit the gas. The sound of heavy boots hitting the pavement echoed from the hallway. The glass doors of the conference room, which were already ajar, were shoved open all the way. Federal agents, a voice roared. Hands where we can see them, now. 6 agents in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI stormed into the room, their weapons drawn and leveled at Marcus and Blaire. Marcus Vane, the lead agent shouted. You are under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Marcus didn't fight. He slumped forward, putting his face in his hands, weeping openly. He knew the game was over. He held out his wrists, and the click of the handcuffs was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. But Blaire did not go quietly. She looked at the agents, then at Arthur, and finally at me. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She realized that everything, the money, the house, the reputation, the freedom was gone, and she blamed me. You, she screamed, a guttural, animalistic sound. You ruined everything, you jealous little rat. You set me up. She didn't run for the door. She ran for me. She grabbed the heavy champagne bottle from the table, swinging it like a club. She lunged across the short distance between us, her eyes wide with madness. I will kill you, she shrieked. I didn't have time to move. I flinched, raising my arm to protect my face, but she never reached me. Arthur Sterling, moving with the speed of a man half his age, stepped in front of me, but he didn't need to strike her. 2 agents were on her instantly. One tackled her around the waist, lifting her off her feet, while the other grabbed her arm, twisting the bottle from her grip. It fell to the floor, shattering on the marble, spraying glass and foam over Marcus's shoes. Blaire kicked and screamed as they pinned her to the carpet. Get off me. Do you know who I am? I am Blaire Loxley. I am a CEO. You are a felon, Ms. Loxley, the agent said, wrenching her arms behind her back. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it. Arthur looked down at her, straightening his coat. You should have signed the violin waiver, he said dryly. It would have been cheaper. I watched as they dragged her up. Her hair was a mess, her expensive dress was ruined, and her face was streaked with mascara and snot. She looked at me one last time as they hauled her toward the door. There was no arrogance left, only fear. Jordan, she cried out, her voice desperate now. Jordan, please, tell them it was a mistake. We are sisters. You can't let them take me to prison. I will give you the house. I will give you everything. I looked at her. I thought about the violin freezing on the terrace. I thought about the letter she burned. I thought about the way she looked at my father's grave and checked her watch. "You don't have the house, Blaire," I said quietly, "and you are not my sister. You are just a tenant who got evicted." The agents marched her out. The doors closed. The room was suddenly very quiet. Arthur turned to me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, a clean one this time, and offered it to me. I hadn't realized I was crying until I felt the tears cold on my cheeks. "Are you all right, Jordan?" he asked. I took the handkerchief and wiped my face. I looked at the empty room, at the shattered glass, at the FinCEN alert still flashing on my laptop screen. "I don't know," I admitted. "I feel light." "That is the weight of justice lifting," Arthur said. "It can be dizzying at first." He walked over to the window and looked out at the storm. The snow was still falling, covering the city in a blanket of white, burying the mud and the grime. "What happens now?" I asked, walking up beside him. "Now." Arthur smiled. "Now we clean up the mess. The transfer is blocked. The assets will be returned to the trust. With Blaire's conviction, the Slayer rule and standard forfeiture laws will likely strip her of any beneficiary status. The estate is yours, Jordan, all of it." "I don't care about the money," I said honestly. "I just wanted to stop her." "I know," Arthur said. "That is why you deserve the money. And as for the firm," he looked around the office with a critical eye, "I think I'm going to have to come out of retirement. Vortex Legal needs a new name and a new management team. I might need a chief financial officer who knows how to spot a fraud from a mile away. Do you know anyone looking for a job?" I looked at him, surprised. "Are you offering me a job?" "I am offering you a partnership," Arthur said. "You have the instincts of a wolf, Jordan, but the heart of a sheepdog. That is a rare combination. The city needs more of it." I looked down at the street below, where the flashing lights of the police cars were painting the snow red and blue. I saw them loading Blaire and Marcus into the back of the vans. I thought about my father. I thought about the music he loved. I thought about the violin waiting for me in the motel room. "I have to fix something first," I said. "The violin?" Arthur asked. "Yes," I nodded. I promised him I would make it play again. "Take all the time you need," Arthur said. "But when you are ready, come find me. I will be in the corner office, and this time, I promise I won't be wearing a beard." We stood there for a moment longer, watching the storm clear. The sun was beginning to break through the clouds, casting a pale winter light over Chicago. The nightmare was over. The long winter of my life was finally breaking. "Thank you, Arthur," I said. "No," he said, turning to wheel himself toward the door, opting to leave the chair behind and walk with his cane instead. "Thank you for the coffee. It was the best cup I have had in 20 years. The walk from the conference room to the elevators was the longest journey I had ever witnessed. Though it spanned only 50 feet of plush white carpet, Blaire, who had strutted through these halls for years as if she owned the very air we breathed, was now slumped forward, her wrists bound in steel behind her back. She did not look at the staff who had gathered in the corridor, drawn by the commotion. She stared at her feet, her expensive heels dragging on the floor, stripped of every ounce of the arrogance that had defined her existence. Marcus Vane walked ahead of her, flanked by 2 agents. He was weeping softly, a broken sound that echoed uncomfortably in the silence. The receptionists, the paralegals, the junior associates, the very people Marcus had terrorized and belittled for a decade, watched with wide eyes. There was no gloating in their faces, only a stunned realization that the monster in the corner office was just a man, and a frightened one at that. I stood in the doorway of the conference room, watching the elevator doors slide shut, sealing my sister and her lawyer inside a steel box that would take them down to a life they were completely unprepared for. The room was quiet now. The storm outside had broken, and a shaft of pale winter sunlight pierced the clouds, illuminating the shards of the shattered champagne bottle on the floor. Arthur Sterling sighed, a sound that seemed to release years of tension. He leaned heavily on the cane one of the agents had retrieved for him. "I apologize for the theatrics, Jordan," Arthur said, turning to me. His voice was gentle now, lacking the booming command he had used on Marcus. "And I apologize for not intervening sooner. I had to wait until they committed the act. Intent is hard to prove in court, but hitting that confirm button, that is a confession signed in digital ink." "You don't have to apologize," I said, walking over to the window. "You saved me. I was ready to fight, but I don't know if I could have won alone." Arthur limped over and stood beside me. "You would have won eventually. The truth has a way of rising, like oil in water. But I admit, I had a personal stake in this." He looked out at the skyline of Chicago. "I lied to you earlier. Jordan, I didn't just know your father from a few games of chess in the park. Robert and I went to law school together 50 years ago. We were associates at the same firm before he went into industry and I started Vortex." I looked at him in surprise. "He never mentioned you. I mean, he mentioned a friend named Artie, but—" "Artie," Arthur chuckled. A warm, nostalgic sound. "Yes, that was me. We lost touch over the years, as men often do when life gets busy. But when I saw his obituary, I was heartbroken. And when I heard whispers in the legal community that his estate was being handled by Marcus Vane, a man I was already investigating, I knew I had to look closer. I saw what was happening to the trust. I saw the foundation being drained. And I saw you." He turned his blue eyes on me. "I saw a daughter who gave up everything to care for a friend I couldn't save. I needed to know if you were like him. I needed to know if the apple had fallen far from the tree, or if you were just another Loxley looking for a payout. So the test in the snow," I began, "was necessary." Arthur nodded. "If you had walked past me, I still would have arrested Marcus and Blaire. I would have saved the money. But I would not have offered you the partnership. I would not have invited you into my life. You passed a test you didn't even know you were taking. Jordan, Robert would have been incredibly proud." Tears pricked my eyes again, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of validation. For 3 years, Blaire had called me weak. She had called me a leech. She had made me feel small. But here was a titan of industry telling me that my softness was actually my strength. "Now," Arthur said, tapping his cane on the floor, "regarding the estate, as the independent monitor, and now the acting interim director of the firm, I am exercising my authority to void the transfer. The funds are already being clawed back. The waiver you refused to sign is evidence, and the previous waiver Blaire forged is null and void. By virtue of the Slayer statute and her conviction for fraud against the estate, Blaire has forfeited her right to inheritance. It all goes to you, Jordan, the house, the trust, the charity, everything." I took a deep breath. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about the principle. "Thank you, Arthur," I said. "But I don't want to run it alone. I am an auditor, not a CEO." "You won't be alone," Arthur smiled. "I am officially unretiring. I have a firm to clean up, and you have a foundation to rebuild. We make a good team. Don't you think, the beggar and the auditor?" 3 weeks later, the snow had melted, leaving the streets of Chicago wet and glistening under a clear blue sky. I stood in the foyer of the penthouse, my hand resting on the brass doorknob. I had not been back since the day I was evicted. I had stayed in a hotel, letting the forensic teams finish their sweep of the property, but now, the yellow tape was gone. The police were gone. It was just me and the house. I pushed the door open. I expected the air to be stale. I expected it to smell like Blaire's perfume or the chemical cleaners of the staging crew. But as I stepped inside, I smelled lemon oil and old paper. I walked into the living room. It was empty of the rental furniture Blaire had brought in. The space was open, vast, and filled with sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The cold, sterile aesthetic she had tried to impose was gone. The house felt like it was taking a deep breath after holding it for years. I walked to the center of the room, holding a black velvet case. I sat on the floor. just as I used to when I was a child listening to my father practice. I placed the case in front of me and unzipped it. Inside lay the violin. It did not look new. The restoration master I had found, an elderly Italian man Arthur had recommended, had been honest with me. He said he could not erase the damage Blaire had done. The thermal shock had cracked the spruce top all the way down to the saddle, but he had not tried to hide the crack. Instead, he had stabilized it using a technique he called cleating, reinforcing the wood from the inside. On the outside, a thin dark line ran down the body of the instrument. It was a scar, a permanent reminder of the winter it had survived. "It will not sound exactly the same," the luthier had told me. "The wood has been stressed. It has been broken and healed. The sound will be deeper, more complex, like a person who has lived through tragedy." I lifted the instrument. It felt solid in my hands. The varnish had been polished, glowing with a warm, honeyed hue. I tightened the bow. I placed the violin under my chin. My fingers found their positions on the fingerboard instinctively. I took a breath, closed my eyes, and drew the bow across the strings. The note that emerged was not the bright, cheerful tone I remembered from my childhood. It was richer, darker. It resonated in my chest. A sound that carried the weight of grief but also the incredible power of survival. It was a beautiful, haunting sound. It was the sound of victory. I played. I played for the empty room. I played for the dust motes dancing in the light. I played for my father, who I knew was listening somewhere, and I played for myself. When I finished, I lowered the bow. The silence that followed was not empty. It was peaceful. I stood up and walked to the sliding glass doors. I opened them and stepped out onto the terrace. The air was crisp, but not biting. I walked to the spot where I had found the violin freezing in the snow 3 weeks ago. I looked down at the city. From this height, the people below looked like ants, scurrying about their business. I saw the flow of traffic, the rhythm of the grid. Somewhere down there, in a federal detention center, Blaire was waiting for her trial. She was learning what it meant to live in a box without a view. She was learning that you cannot buy your way out of everything. I wasn't the scared girl who had been locked out on this balcony anymore. I wasn't the victim who had begged for 2 more hours to pack. I was the owner. I was the protector. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Arthur. "Meeting with the Elder Justice Coalition is set for 2 o'clock. They are excited about the grant proposal. Don't be late." I smiled. I had used the first tranche of the recovered inheritance to completely restructure the Loxley Hope Foundation. We were no longer just giving out generic scholarships. We were launching a new initiative, the Sterling Loxley Legal Aid Fund. Our mission was specific to provide top-tier legal representation for elderly citizens who had been victims of financial abuse, fraud, and predatory guardianships. We were going to be the shield for people like my father. We were going to be the nightmare for people like Blaire and Marcus. Arthur had insisted on coming on board as the senior advisor. He called himself my grandfather-in-law, a title I accepted with more happiness than I could express. He had given me a family again. I walked back inside, closing the door on the noise of the city. I went to the fireplace mantel. It was bare, just as Blaire had left it. She had thrown away the urn, and though I had recovered it from the sanitation department in a frantic search the day after the arrest, I had decided not to keep it there. I had scattered my father's ashes in the lake, as he had once requested in one of those letters Blaire thought she had destroyed, but that I had memorized years ago. He was free now. But the mantle needed something. I reached into my bag and pulled out a framed photograph. It was a picture taken 5 years ago, before the sickness, before the betrayal. It was my father and me, standing on this very balcony, laughing at a joke I couldn't remember. He looked strong. He looked happy. I placed the photo in the center of the mantel. Then, I took the violin in its velvet case and placed it gently beside the photo. The scar on the wood faced outward, a badge of honor. I touched the frame of the photo. "I did it, Dad," I whispered into the quiet room. "I saved the legacy. I saved the house. But mostly, I saved the truth." I could almost hear his voice in the room, warm and reassuring. I know you did. Jordan, I never doubted you. I turned away from the mantel and picked up my briefcase. I had a meeting to get to. I had a foundation to run. I had a partner waiting for me. The penthouse was no longer a fortress of solitude. It was a base of operations. As I walked to the elevator, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back wasn't wearing a uniform of grief. She was wearing a tailored navy suit. Her head was held high. Her eyes were clear. The winter was over, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready for spring. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Justice is a dish best served with a side of unexpected alliances. Isn't it? Please drop a comment below and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far our community reaches. If you enjoyed seeing Jordan take back her life, please subscribe to the Family Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button so more people can hear this story of resilience and justice. Your support means the world to us.